Ever since U.S. tariffs came on the scene, a big question people have asked is, are they even legal? Well, that's now been kicked up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is set to rule on the legislation behind the tariffs.
We watch the Supreme Court politically all the time when people are wondering, are they conservative? Are they liberal? Are they going to be a check against Trump? Are they just going to rubber stamp what he wants to do? This case is maybe the easiest case on which the Supreme Court could say no.
Could the court really strike down Trump's tariffs? Well, maybe. And Canada? Hey, we'll take the win. Hi, I'm Paul Haberstrood. Welcome to The Cost of Living. Let's have a show of hands. Who's over this whole tariff thing? If your hand is up, you may want to watch the U.S. Supreme Court. It could say no to Trump's tariffs. We'll look at what that could mean for Canada and the rest of the world. Also today, for some people, money is easy. Make it, spend it, bada boom. For others, it's less bada bing and more conversations like, tell me about your mother, with their financial therapist. Up first, corporate executives get paid millions to make the right calls. So, why do they blow it so often? So, Jen Keane, clearly you do not get a lot of stuff wrong, but what was the last thing you messed up?
Well, a few months ago I bought this blouse. It had these gigantic puffy sleeves that I thought I could make work, but I could not. It was like that Seinfeld puffy shirt. It was a big mistake.
You didn't debut that little number at work, did you?
No, that stayed in the privacy of my closet.
But not every mistake does. And these days, companies, they are making a lot of mistakes, very public mistakes. Which brings us to WestJet. It tried to squeeze an extra row of seats into economy class, but that cut out like 2 inches of legroom for the people who were sitting there.
And surprise, surprise, people noticed. People like Amanda Schmidt, who was flying on one of those planes with her mom and dad. Her dad is 6'3", so she made a TikTok.
Dad, could you just straighten out your legs there?
No, impossible.
Mom, how about you?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be sharing my leg space with him.
At least they're taking it well.
They were super nice about it, actually. Nicer than I would have been, I think. That video took off. At the same time, WestJet was getting a flood of complaints from passengers and staff who were having to deal with all those unhappy customers.
Okay, so WestJet backed off, but it had to know that passengers would not like this. So then, why did they do it? Or really, for that matter, why does any company make a decision that, you don't have to have an MBA to know it's a bad idea?
Al Lewis asks himself that question every day. He is a longtime business reporter who writes a Substack called Business Blunders. And Al's been doing this for about a year, and finding material hasn't been that hard.
I wake up every morning and see something to write about. I never wake up and go, wow, the world is just perfect today. I can't find a story. No, there's a blunder every day.
Now, not all blunders are the same. There's the nefarious stuff that he writes about, the Ponzi schemes and the white-collar crimes. Then there are just bad ideas, like products that never should have left the drawing table.
And the classic example here, like number one with a bullet, gotta be New Coke.
Let me put on my jacket with the big shoulder pads and take you back to 1985. Coke's biggest competitor, Pepsi, was running this really great ad campaign.
Across Canada, people are taking the Pepsi Challenge, and more pick Pepsi because you know a winner when you taste one.
People would put on a blindfold and then they would sit down, take a sip of Coke and Pepsi. Big surprise, they would choose the Pepsi. Those ads really worked. Coke got spooked. It thought, okay, we got to do something. Let's throw out our century-old recipe and make new Coke, which tasted more like Pepsi.
And this was a disaster, like to the point where New Coke is now taught as a cautionary tale in business schools.
It is, and it's not the only failed idea out there. Do you remember Harley Davidson perfume?
Wild thing, I love you.
Legendary Harley Davidson.
Eau de Toilette Aftershave and Body Spray, the scent of freedom.
I mean, did Freedom sell?
Not really. And neither did this.
Now, Clairol's put yogurt with natural organic protein into new shimmery, shiny Touch of Yogurt shampoo. So rich it makes your hair shimmer and shine. Touch of Yogurt, get the touch.
That sounds more like a Saturday Night Live sketch than like a real commercial.
It was real, but it didn't stick around for long. People just didn't love the idea of dairy product in their hair, apparently. And, this century, the tech world is littered with big swings that missed, like Google Glass or Quibi.
Which was the streaming thing.
Yeah, it launched back in 2020. It had $2 billion in financing and some big Hollywood names behind it.
And, Hollywood producers were going to get involved, and they were going to make short-form videos, video you can watch. I think today it's called Facebook Reels, and you can get it for free.
So, R.I.P. Quibi?
Yeah. Al Lewis calls these kinds of failures miscalculations. A blunder, he says, is something else. It's when a company puts profits ahead of its customers.
The difference between a good idea and a bad idea is this whole concept of, like, are you making life easier for your customers, or are you simply disrupting them? Okay, don't disrupt the customers. Okay, don't give customers something they don't want. Don't take things away from the customer that you used to give them for free. If you're doing that, you're cutting corners.
Well, cutting corners or cutting out all the legroom.
Yeah, that's a big risk, and those risks can backfire on you. On the other hand, great ideas give customers something they want. They offer something new or make customers' lives easier. And for an example of that, Al points to the story of Blockbuster and Netflix.
Before streaming, you used to have to go to the Blockbuster store, and you got 1 night or 2 nights or 3-night rentals, and then you'd have a late fee. So Netflix came along and said, okay, you're going to get your DVDs in the mail, and you hold on to them for as long as you like. So that made life easier for the customer.
And today, Netflix is a multi-billion-dollar company, and Blockbuster is dead. 25 years ago, the owners of Netflix actually went to Blockbuster and offered to sell them the startup for $50 million. But Blockbuster was like, nah, we're good.
Sometimes the biggest mistake you make is the thing you don't do. I got that from a fortune cookie.
Okay.
But here's the thing, Jen. These companies are filled with MBAs. They make a ton of money. Their job is to make smart decisions. And yet, here's Al. He says he wakes up every day and can't get to all the blunders that happen.
Yeah, he says companies are actually making more mistakes now than ever because the pace of everything is so much faster. There's more competition out there. There's more pressure from shareholders or from private equity owners to increase profits.
Well, yeah, if you look at private equity alone, there are trillions of dollars out there. They're all looking to make money, and that is money that didn't exist 20 years ago.
So you need to come up with new ideas to make that money.
And that's the competitive pressure that they're under. And it often leads to, reckless decision-making and sometimes just miscalculations. Not everything's ill intent, but, the biggest blunders do involve a little bit of ill intent or a little bit of somebody wanting to squeeze a little blood out of a turnip. That's just business.
So WestJet, the extra seats, really, squeezing that turnip.
Well, yeah, that row of extra seats, it would have added up to more profit over time.
Adding 6 more seats to a 174 passenger cabin doesn't sound like much, but when you multiply that over hundreds of flights, it's a lot more revenue. That's it. They didn't do this because they thought it was a good idea. They did this because they thought they could get away with it.
But they didn't get away with it. They backed off. They're putting the seats back to how they were.
The backlash has just been too much. So the reversal by WestJet is an acknowledgement that it made a mistake, but it hasn't explicitly apologized either. It just said, hey, we were trying something that's been popular with other airlines around the globe. And Al is not buying that.
These seats weren't popular. Nobody posted videos of like, look, this seat doesn't go back. Isn't this wonderful? That wasn't popular.
It was popular with the CEO.
It was popular with the airlines that wanted to make more money. I mean, Al does give WestJet credit for reversing its decision. But the real credit, he says, goes to passengers like Amanda Schmidt, who showed everyone what it was like to squeeze into one of these airline seats. So on behalf of passengers everywhere, he would like to say thank you.
Because the history of the airline industry overall has been to get these seats tighter and tighter and smaller at a time when people are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is the first time I've seen anybody put an end to that.
So, score one for the little guy?
I would say score one for the tall guys, actually.
Well, you know what? However long your legs are, we'll take the wins where we can get them. Thanks, Jen.
Anytime.
On your Radio NBI podcast, this is The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Haberstrood. If you want to eat healthier, you can hire a nutritionist. Personal trainers can get you all swole. Divorce coaches. Digital detox specialists. These days, nothing is too niche if you need a little help. Including getting in touch with your feelings about money.
Dana Fadel grew up in Lebanon in the 90s. Her dad ran a construction company, and her family was well off. Then, everything changed.
The war erupted in the country, so no one was building anymore, so we lost everything. We really went from almost being like in the top percent to absolutely nothing.
Her family immigrated to North America and rebuilt their lives. She studied engineering and got a high-paying job in IT. But that childhood experience stuck with her.
If I made a big expense, I would freak out. The first thing that would come to my mind was like, oh, I'm going to be homeless. I'm going to sleep on the streets.
She had a really hard time spending money, even on things she needed.
I sat for 2 years without furniture in my house.
It's not unusual to worry about money, especially these days. According to a recent government survey, more than half of Canadians say they feel stressed about their finances.
We lose sleep over thinking about how am I going to afford to pay this bill, or, having thoughts around, I never have enough, and constantly feeling behind.
Michelle Johnston is a psychologist in Calgary. A few years ago, she started noticing that more of her clients wanted to talk money. But they didn't just need financial advice. They needed financial therapy. And that's something different.
It's helping people explore the relationship that they have with money, the emotions that show up, and the behaviors or the way that we interact with money.
Behaviors like impulse buying, overspending, or even underspending.
They save in excess, right? Because they've gone through some really difficult past experiences where they know what it's like to, not have a lot of money.
And when it comes to healthy relationships with money, social media isn't helping. That deep, dark rabbit hole of reels featuring people who got rich off crypto.
It's very much a culture of comparison. Whether it's a vacation or buying a new home, there's pressure to perform financially.
Alyssa Davies co-hosts a podcast called Money Feels. She's also studying to become a financial therapist. And right now, she says there's a huge demand.
I started my practicum in September and I'm fully booked until May. So it's very clearly something that people want and desire and are ready to start to explore.
But here's something to keep in mind. Anyone can call themselves a financial therapist. The title isn't regulated or licensed in Canada. Alyssa says there are typically two kinds of people who do this.
There are a lot of financial professionals who have shifted from working in the finance industry to now doing therapy with their clients, so they went back to school. And then there are just psychologists trying to talk about the psychology of money and how it actually impacts us day to day.
Dana Fadel did her research and is now seeing a therapist who is helping her work through her money trauma. She says she feels lighter, less anxious.
And it changed my life completely because I think even if you had given me more money or you doubled my money, I don't think that instability would have gone away without having done the emotional work.
For The Cost of Living, I'm Danielle Nerman.
This is The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Havershood. And now for the latest in our global tariff soap opera. Since last we met, Donald Trump threatened the EU with a blanket tariff if Denmark didn't give up Greenland. Some other stuff happened, and eventually Trump said, tariffs off. What this episode seems to make clear, tariffs aren't just an economic thing. They're a cudgel the U.S. administration will use to get what it wants. And Canada knows that better than most, which is why the U.S. Supreme Court is now front and center. It's set to rule on the legality of Trump's tariffs, or at least some of them. What could that decision mean for this country? Chris Sands is the head of the Center for Canadian Studies at Johns Hopkins University. Chris, it's been a little while since we've talked. Hi.
I'm glad we're back. Yes, hello.
What exactly is the Supreme Court going to be ruling on?
It's going to be ruling on something called the International Economic Emergency Powers Act of 1977. And this bill, this legislation, allows the president in an emergency to act to protect the American economy. Now, 1977 may ring a bell with some of your audience because it was a response to the oil shocks. And the idea behind it was Congress wanted the president to be able to say, no exporting of oil, we need it, prices are spiking. And that's the origin of it. The president, President Trump, has used this legislation in order to impose tariffs on Canada, but also on other countries. And the fundamental question in this Supreme Court case is there's nothing about tariffs in this bill, which we in Washington have to turn everything into an acronym. So we call it IEPA, which sounds horrible. But there's nothing specifically about tariffs in the legislation. And all the previous rulings on this bill have said, no, it's not about tariffs. You can't use it. And so that is what the Supreme Court will be reviewing. And if you look at the score so far, most judges have said it doesn't work for tariffs. And I think that's why so many of us are expecting the Supreme Court will concur.
Okay, so just to be clear, these IEPA tariffs, they're different than the ones on Canadian steel and aluminum, and of course a bunch of our exports, they're already protected by our free trade deal. But what happens, Chris, if the Supreme Court does say these tariffs that it's looking at are illegal?
Well, there'll be a couple of consequences. First, everybody who had to pay a tariff that was imposed under this legislation will be owed a refund. And it could be somewhere in the range of $150 to $180 billion when you think of all the companies that have had to pay tariffs. And those aren't just Canadians. It includes other countries as well. So that's the first thing. And there's been a lot of discussion about where we're going to find the money and how we're going to handle that. There's a second thing, which is what the U.S. government then does in response. And they have a couple of options. They could try to reissue the tariffs on a separate authority. So they have to go through the paperwork of that process, and they could hit Canada and those goods who are hoping for relief with a new tariff. That still might mean that the original refunds have to go back, but that Canada could face tariffs under a new line that hasn't been rejected by the Supreme Court. Or, and this is one of the interesting twists here, there is a provision of the 1974 Trade Act called the 122 tariff. If you remember the 1974 Trade Act, I'm sure
I remember it well, Chris. Obviously, yeah. No, I was rocked to sleep with it.
Well, it will put you to sleep. This is the bill. It says that the government can issue a 15% tariff for 150 days, and it just says, we're hitting this tariff, and you start collecting the money right away. You have some ability to exempt certain countries or certain products, but it only lasts for that 150 days. And people have looked at this as maybe the best fallback for the government because it can be imposed immediately, and it doesn't involve a prior investigation.
So practically, Chris, what might this ruling mean then for Canada, given the tariffs that we are facing?
I think what Canadians will get out of this mainly is greater predictability. And this is a little bit of sort of thinking about how the economy works. We have in Canada and the US a lot of money. Investors are ready to spend it. And where they'll spend it is where they can assess the risk and say, okay, I understand the risk. Here I'm going to invest and hope to get a return. As long as we have arbitrary tariffs that Donald Trump in a bad mood could throw at a country like Canada, a lot of investors will put their money into the stock market. They'll put their money into bonds. They may decide that they're going to invest in crypto or, some cryptocurrencies of some kind, because those are all very liquid. They can get their money out in a hurry. But will they invest in new plant and equipment? Will they invest in a new factory? Will they invest in new computer software? All of those things are vulnerable. And so we're sitting in this situation, and I'm sure you have talked about this with your audiences before. Canada struggles a little bit from a productivity gap. It needs to improve its productivity to be more competitive. To do that, it needs investment. And that includes in things like critical minerals, but also the auto sector and some very basic things. But investors are hesitant because of this uncertainty. So remove a little uncertainty, and you'll start to see, I hope, investors saying, okay, now we know what we're dealing with. Even with regard to Kuzma, because I know we're doing a review of the Kuzma right now. And so there's a certain uncertainty there to see what we're going to see before July 1st. But every bit of uncertainty you take out opens the door for more investment. And you've got pension funds, you've got the federal government putting some money on the table. A lot could happen if this case goes against IEEPA and the U.S. goes by normal tariffs and has to do investigations first.
Well, if the White House does lose this case, Supreme Court rules against it. You mentioned Kuzma and that renegotiation. Could that take away some of Trump's leverage in that renegotiation? Could this court ruling be good for Canada in terms of our deal making?
Well, I wish I had good news on that. I'm not entirely certain, because one of the things, if you look at the Kuzma language for this review, that the president or that the US, Canada, and Mexico together are able to negotiate without getting congressional approval is the rule of origin. And you'll know the rule of origin is quite high. It's 65% for most goods, 75% for autos. So you have a very high bar of North American content right now. One thing we're worried about is the president will say, okay, I want, of the 75% for autos, I want at least 50% coming from the US. That's going to mean basically the US clawing jobs away from Canada, reshoring them into the United States. A terrible move for the auto industry, which is already suffering from this sort of double take of 1 minute we're looking at EVs and building battery plants, and the next minute industrial policy in the US shifts, and now we want gas-powered cars and we want different things. And that's really hard in an industry that plans over a long haul. So that's the risk to me, is that what will happen is Kuzma will become the next battleground where we're having these fights. Now, I don't want everyone to want to jump off a bridge after they hear this interview. So I want to suggest something that I think could be positive. Could we have a North American truce? The president has negotiated a truce with China. The president's cut deals with Mexico already. What if we said we are going to just negotiate at the Kuzma table for the review? That's where we're going to have all our fights. But in the meantime, we're going to drop the IEEPA tariffs. We're going to operate normally. That alone would provide an awful lot of stability for Canada and for the United States, and might get investment going. And where that matters, and I don't want to say we wouldn't do it for Canada, because we do love Canada. Well, some of us do anyway. I think one of the things that this could be beneficial for are the midterm elections. What we've seen in polling is that a lot of ordinary Americans, they know that Trump's for tariffs. They don't understand how those tariffs are helping them with cost of living, your big subject. Like in Midwestern states, they're affected much more by big things like the auto sector tariffs and all the changes in policy. And they're worried about what's going to happen with their jobs. In my home state of Michigan, which is a lovely state, a lot of Canadians who used to do cross-border shopping or would come across the border to do some tourism, they stayed home this year. And there are a lot of businesses that are really hurting. So from the point of view of the voter, they're not so sure the big macro numbers that the president is always touting are what they're feeling. And so economic confidence is not high, even though some people like Trump, some people don't. It's that economy factor that's really going to drive votes. And the midterms, a lot's at stake. Control of the House, control of the Senate. So if we get through November and it looks like the Democrats have taken control of one or both chambers of Congress, the president will have another check on his ability to do the things he wants to do when he's in a bad mood and wants to hit Canada or Mexico or anyone else with tariffs. And what I don't understand, just as a normal citizen, I don't understand why we can give breaks to China, we can give breaks to Mexico, and we hit Canada with no breaks at all. And I just don't see why Canada can't get some of those same deals. So we're going to have all that bluster. But I think that Canada is well positioned, has been very reasonable, and we ought to be able to do a deal. What Canada is for most Americans is our friendliest market, one of the largest purchasers per capita of American exports. And we feel there's no justification for all of these tariffs being thrown at Canada. And I think there's a centrist position that Trump could pivot to here. Even if we have a 10% baseline tariff on everything, at least it's fair and we could move on. Is it ideal? No. But there's so much room for us to do a deal here and lower some of our costs.
Well, Chris, we like the sounds of a truce. Thanks.
You're very welcome.
Chris Sands is the head of the Center for Canadian Studies at Johns Hopkins University. If you read Goosebumps growing up or The Babysitter's Club, maybe you got those books from Scholastic, the company with the catalogs, the one that sets up fairs in gymnasiums, sells books to school kids. Well, we talked about that on a recent show, and we asked you for your stories.
In the early 90s, Scholastic was the thing. All the kids were always ready to go, and I was always excited to get my new Captain Underpants book.
I've been an educator for more than 50 years, and in the early 70s, at the end of the year, Scholastic offered bargain book packages for teachers. As I recall, it was something like 20 books for about $25, and that way, teachers could put one book in each child's report card envelope.
I was very firmly in the have-not category. Growing up, my family was really poor, and I gotta say, I still loved the Scholastic Book Fair. I loved getting the catalog and bringing it home and circling all the books that I wanted that I knew I couldn't have. There was that little bit of a sad time when everyone got their books and I didn't get any. But by the time I was 11 or 12 years old, I had my own paper route, and I would save my money for those book fairs. And now it's something that I get to see my kids enjoy, and we are also not always as flush with cash as we would like, and so they have to be pretty choosy. But they've found series that they love. So I think it's something where maybe the pros outweigh the cons, especially where it gives money to our schools as well.
Well, thanks for sharing all that. And if you hear something on the show and want to give us a call, our number is 1-866-550-COST. That's 1-866-550-2678. Or send us an email, costofliving@cbc.ca. That's all for the show. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. The show is produced by Danielle Nerman, Leah Hendry, and Jennifer Keene, with help from Jeff Kynock. Oh, and if you're listening and you don't mind giving us a review on the podcast, smashing that 5 stars, whatever it is, we'd appreciate it. I'm Paul Havershrud. Thanks for listening.